Hey, good Tuesday, everybody, and happy first day of October out there. Hopefully, we're having a wonderful start to my favorite month personally. I'm a big fan of fall, so October really, obviously kind of checks off all of those boxes. But unfortunately, we do have some areas to watch out here for some active weather, including still watching the Gulf of Mexico. And unfortunately, overnight, the models kind of upticked a little bit with our area of interest out there. And show a higher likelihood of a storm developing and potentially could become a hurricane. Now, I'm not obviously here to scare anybody, and in fact, I'm going to go ahead and rant here for a little bit. With the last storm with Helene, I had plenty of comments before the storm telling me I was overhyping it and just making thumbnails for clicks and views and all that. Folks, I called it the storm of the year 5 days before landfall, and I called it a generational storm 2 or 3 days before landfall. And again, on all of those videos, I got plenty of negative comments. Now, not all of them. Some of you are very nice people, and I'm very grateful for those of you. But basically, just the point of this, and me telling you all this, is my number one goal is to keep you safe, okay? My goal is not to get a certain amount of views. I don't have a quota to meet, okay? My number one goal is to keep you safe. So if my thumbnail says something like generational storm, that's what I think. That is what my forecast is, and this time around, it panned out. Now, am I wrong sometimes? Absolutely, as is every other human, no matter what field they are in. But again, I'm never going to make a thumbnail to lead you down a road that isn't my actual forecast. So, for example, today's thumbnail may say something like increasing concern or something like that over the Gulf of Mexico, and that's my forecast. We've seen an uptick in model guidance for the potential of a storm. Therefore, my concern is increasing for a storm. Again, I just want you to know there are plenty of folks on YouTube in the weather community. I'm not going to point fingers or name anybody, but that will put just about anything in a thumbnail or their forecast for that matter. It's the hope of clicks and views and a monetary gain from it, but that is never my goal. Again, my number one goal is to keep you safe and prepared for the potential of life-threatening weather. So again, I just kind of wanted to go ahead and put that here at the beginning of the video because I think it's important. And anytime you watch a YouTube channel that talks about the weather, whether it's me or somebody else, it doesn't even have to be me. I just want you to really kind of look into their heart a little bit and think, what is this person in it for? Are they in it for some sort of monetary gain, or are they here because they want to keep me safe? And I think, relatively speaking, it can be pretty easy to figure that out by just watching a video or two. For most channels. So hopefully my channel comes across to you as somebody who legitimately cares about your safety. With that said, let's go and dive into things because, again, we do have a lot to discuss, and I'm sorry about the rant, but that's just something that's kind of been on my mind a little bit recently and that I think is important to talk about. All right, satellite imagery. Now, I will mention we still have satellite communications issues. I think actually, and I could be wrong on this, but I think the station that houses a lot of this data was actually in Asheville, North Carolina, which obviously, unfortunately, is still going through that just catastrophic disaster. Although we are beginning to see a lot more images out of there and a lot more supplies getting into the mountains, which is great to see. Again, not having satellite is the least of our concerns right now. But again, some websites have it, but it's kind of choppy sometimes and it'll jump back and forth. So again, just want you to know, I probably won't be showing a lot of satellite, but luckily this satellite loop is kind of working right now, even though it's skipping a couple frames every now and then. But taking a look at it, again, a couple things to note here. Tropical Storm Kirk out here getting its act together here into portions of the central Atlantic, and this is likely to become a powerful major hurricane and will be something that we absolutely need to watch here coming on down the road. And then behind it, we have another area to watch here. Just behind it, and I'm sorry, I'm having to look up something real quick on my phone, but we have another area right behind it. This is an area to watch with a 90% chance of development within the next 7 days, and very likely really within the next 48 hours to develop into a named tropical system. That one would be Tropical Storm Leslie and could also become a powerful hurricane, which we'll need to keep an eye on. Now, other than that, the other area to watch is in the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. Right now, not a whole lot going on, but we will continue to watch for the potential development. That one would be Milton, so our M name. And again, like I mentioned, model guidance overnight has definitely increased with that potential for that storm to try to develop. And if we take a look at the latest from the National Hurricane Center, again, obviously Kirk, a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm. Behind it, that area, a 90% chance red blob on your map. And then our Gulf area is still sitting at 40%, but now up to a 10% within the next 48 hours. And I imagine if the afternoon model guidance shows what the overnight model guidance showed, this will probably get bumped up back to a 50 or 60% chance of development. Now, something I want you to note here as well with the area that's shaded here is notice how now it kind of curves well into the Gulf of Mexico. And we'll talk about why this is, but basically there's a whole lot of energy and vorticity in the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico currently, and what the models have been struggling with is if any one of these pieces of energy would kind of take over as the main piece and then develop into a storm, and a lot of the models are starting to think that maybe an area into the Bay of Campeche might actually be that piece of energy that develops, becomes stronger, and then moves up generally towards the state of Florida. So again, we'll take a look at all those models, but quickly, let's discuss Kirk, because again, expected to become a powerful hurricane. A pretty impressive looking storm on satellite. The good news with Kirk, again, a very strong storm expected, but we look at the cone here, and you'll notice no land is in the cone as we are seeing that recurve back out to sea. I wouldn't be surprised though to see this become a Category 4 storm. It could be one of the stronger storms we've seen so far this year, but the good news, no impacts to land. So that just leaves us with the other two areas to watch. The one obviously here right behind Kirk, and then our area into the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean. All right, let's start off here in the main development region. Let's talk about Kirk a little bit more, and then let's talk about what is likely to become Leslie behind Kirk, and we'll go ahead and move this ahead at a time. This is our latest GFS model, getting it through this week. This is overnight Thursday into Friday. In fact, let me just move this right to Friday afternoon here. Again, a very powerful Hurricane Kirk at this point, major Hurricane Kirk, probably Category 3 or 4 storm at peak intensity. And again, you'll notice plenty of distance here between Kirk and any sort of land. Now, this will kick up the seas. We'll see high waves. We could see some rip current concerns, but not a concern in terms of any sort of direct impacts. Now, Leslie behind it also develops into a tropical storm here on this model and also becomes a powerful hurricane by the latter half of this week and into the weekend. But you'll notice, much like the storm before, it kind of curves out to sea here on the GFS and doesn't really become a problem. Now, slightly different on the European model. As for Kirk, same fate for both models. Again, takes us well out to sea, brings some rough seas again to portions of the Caribbean, but nothing that we can't handle. Leslie behind it, though, here on the European model is a little bit further south on its track, and we'll move it all the way ahead. You'll notice gets closer, but still ends up curving out to sea just like the GFS. So not really concerned about either one of these storms, but we do want to keep an eye on the second one, Leslie. Again, you take a look at the GFS ensembles and you're saying, well, I don't really know why we're concerned. Again, none of these ensembles show it going anywhere. But we take a look at the European, and this is why we need to watch it. A big chunk of European ensembles have stayed very consistent here in kind of bringing this storm generally in the direction of the Lesser Antilles, and potentially bring some impactful weather. Now, any kind of impacts would be about 10 days from now, so plenty of time to monitor it, and not something that I'm overly worried about, but something just to keep an eye on, and something to monitor here on down the road. All right, let's talk about this area in the Gulf. Like I mentioned, models have really upticked overnight. Now, we're not looking at, a major hurricane or anything. We're still looking at kind of what I've been forecasting, a tropical storm to maybe a low-end hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico within the next 7 to 10 days. And you can kind of see that happening here on some of our models. Now, latest GFS, like I mentioned, there's multiple areas of vorticity, specifically these two, one into the Caribbean and then another up into the Bay of Campeche. And it's going to really matter which one of these pieces of energy try to become the dominant piece. But what I will mention is recently in the models, again, especially overnight, kind of watch what happens here. Again, that Caribbean piece of energy pulls north, doesn't really do much. This is this weekend, but that Bay of Campeche energy remains there. And then eventually kind of tries to get its act going. They both kind of try to develop at the same time. And you'll notice, look at these. We have two separate areas of kind of defined vorticity. It's not entirely out of the question that we could get 2 weak storms in the Gulf. It's unlikely for sure, but it's not entirely out of the question. Now, what happens though on the GFS is we kind of get some merging of energy here, almost even a little bit of Fujiwara effect, which is pretty ironic because we just had some Fujiwara with Helene a week ago, and it's not very common to see it in this part of the world, but potentially kind of 2 times in a row here. But again, you notice those areas of vorticity kind of spin around each other a little bit, and then we get one dominant piece that does move into the state of Florida, and then kind of hangs out around the southeast coastline for a little while before getting kicked on out of here. Now, that's just one model, and again, the GFS, that would probably be a tropical storm, but again, still fighting vorticity, so not a very strong system by any means. We'll take a look at the European. Again, similar setup here, 2 separate areas of vorticity to watch. Which one is going to become kind of the dominant piece of spin here? And on the European, again, it takes its time. This is this weekend, but eventually we do kind of see one piece become a little bit stronger, but even then, this is a week from now going into next Tuesday, we still have this elongated area of spin as both areas kind of fight for dominance in the Gulf of Mexico, and that luckily slows down the development process on the European model. Now, I'll show you the Canadian model. Similar setup here. Again, vorticity in multiple areas, but kind of what happens on the Canadian is we get a piece of vorticity pulled out of the Pacific and advected over Mexico and into the Gulf of Mexico. And what this does is it really enhances our Bay of Campeche area and allows that to become a dominant vort max here into the Gulf. And you'll see that really spin up quite quickly here. Still, though, that piece from the Caribbean tries to pull north. Again, this is this weekend. This is when we're going to be fighting both pieces of vorticity quite close to each other. You'll still notice, but follow that area in the Gulf and see what happens. It really becomes a dominant piece. Does it early, does it far west, and then on approach to eastbound, we get a pretty feisty storm working towards the state of Florida. So I think those 3 models do a great job at showing the significance of what piece of vorticity becomes dominant and when it does it. If we get a scenario like the Canadian where vorticity becomes dominant in the Bay of Campeche early on, then it'll likely have the entirety of the Gulf of Mexico to track from there towards the state of Florida to try to strengthen some in a relatively conducive environment for strengthening. So that's what's concerning, I think, this morning for me personally, is just that some of the models are trending that direction. And some of the models I'll show you, let's see if we have a different, let's see, we can use 500 millibar vorticity, a little different on the icon than surface vorticity, but it'll work. So I'll show you the icon. The icon right now, I would say, is kind of worst case scenario. Again, not my forecast, but worst case scenario. So worth showing you kind of what the ceiling is here. But you'll see what happens. Again, that piece of vorticity really becomes dominant in the Bay of Campeche. This is this weekend. We get a named storm. It continues to strengthen and then slides generally towards the direction of Florida by this coming next week, about a week or so from now. Again, just something that is relatively concerning in the models. Definitely an uptick, from a day ago, and not what you want to see. The good news, though, and we'll talk about this when we get to track, I really do not see this being a North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee problem. To me, this really screams Florida, maybe Alabama, Georgia, the southern half of those states, and maybe the low country of South Carolina and coastal North Carolina could see impacts, but really the state of Florida specifically, and not necessarily the Panhandle either. I really think the West Coast, but again, we'll talk about that here in just a second. All right, environmental conditions, plenty of humid, moist air out there for a tropical storm to try to develop here, especially in the Bay of Campeche. Look at this weekend. Gulf is ripe and primed up with plenty of moisture, and then obviously that's enough to spin up a storm here due to that. And then you'll notice, again, we get a landfall in Florida about a week or so from now. Wind shear. We are seeing kind of hit or miss conducive environment for development with the wind shear. At times, here into the Gulf of Mexico, we do have areas of divergence, generally speaking, or at least light winds, even if not specifically diverging aloft. So, we have moments, but then we also have moments where we kind of get, some higher levels of wind shear that try to sneak in there. But this Friday specifically, you'll notice we do have some kind of outflowing winds here kind of generally towards where something could be trying to develop into the Bay of Campeche. Also, generally outflowing winds where that other piece of vorticity could be a little bit closer to the state of Florida. So again, it's kind of hit or miss, but relatively conducive here wind shear wise for development. And again, because of that, we get something to try to get its act together. And then by the end of its life cycle, as it approaches the state of Florida, I do see an increasing signal for pretty strong westerly wind shear. So again, I think the cap on this storm is going to be, I don't see a Category 5, Category 4 storm out of this, probably not even a Category 3. Right now, I think the highest likelihood I could see anything in the Gulf getting with these conditions would maybe be Category 2. Now, something I'm going to pull up here on the fly, and I've gotten questions or comments saying, well, we already can't get another storm in this part of the Atlantic because we just had Helene and it, kind of cooled down all the waters. While Helene did help to do a little bit of upwelling, folks, it's still very warm in the Gulf of Mexico, and if we get something to develop out here in the Bay of Campeche, Helene never went over that area, so that's not really going to affect potential development. And again, the storm's going to take a path generally like this, so it would only briefly cross where Helene went and where there might be a little bit of deeper upwelling. So again, ocean temperatures is not something I think that is really going to prevent the storm from developing if it wants to. All right, so steering currents, and this is the good news for our folks inland through the Carolinas. Currently, we have a big area of high pressure or kind of some ridging out here. This is kind of acting as a block from anything in the Gulf of Mexico pulling northward. Now, by the time our storm does, I should add, it also is preventing the storm from the Gulf really moving at all in the near term. But by the time we get to this weekend and early next week, there are signs of a trough dipping in the east, and we'll talk about this for our lower 48 forecast next up. This could bring some really nice fall air for some folks. But basically what this does is it kind of helps to pull the wind a little bit more like this. So not necessarily like this. You're not going to get something that kind of goes up and behind the trough, but it does help to pull west to east flow here across the Gulf of Mexico. Again, not necessarily blocking the storm from the southeast at this point, but kind of paralleling it to the south of the southeast, at least the inland southeast. And that's why, again, I would be concerned about the state of Florida, most likely to see a landfall out of this. If, again, it develops, there's still a very strong chance it doesn't. But again, with the latest model trends, looking a little bit more likely to see development. All right, so ensembles, these are the GFS ensembles, and you'll notice still really a mess in the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of members try to develop something, they just struggle to know where they want to develop it and exactly how strong they want to get it. And you can kind of see the same thing on the European ensembles, but I think the European ensembles are doing a little bit of a better job. You can at least get the general idea that something develops and then tries to move towards the state of Florida. And some of these members, again, do try to get up near Category 1 strength, but most of them are in and around tropical storm strength here as it crosses the state. So again, not anything that we need to panic about. You don't need to go start evacuating or buying bread and milk or whatever you buy for a hurricane. But I do want you to just keep an eye on it. And again, things have increased overnight in the models. So definitely not moving necessarily in the right direction. All right, another thing I'll show you, total QPF over the next 10 days. This is now, again, through 10 days. You'll notice kind of a bullseye here over the state of Florida, and specifically right into the Gulf of Mexico, where we could see a lot of rain due to this system, and that'll be something we need to watch for, potential flooding in the Sunshine State, even down into the I-10 corridor from kind of Biloxi, Mobile, all the way back towards Jacksonville. But you folks in South Carolina and North Carolina, look at this. Not a lot showing up at all for rainfall for the next 10 days. So truly, it really is the hand of God kind of blocking this thing to the south, luckily. And hopefully that trend continues. But I feel pretty confident, again, that this is not going to move up anything like Helene did in any sort of direction. Worst case scenario I could see is a path like this. But if that happened, again, I don't think it would be a very strong system. And I think it would probably start moving relatively quickly once it got kind of up here into this northern tier. But again, that's kind of worst case track. I think really more likely right into the Florida Peninsula. So you folks from the Big Bend down through Tampa, Fort Myers, the Keys, definitely watch this one as it could be something to kind of monitor on down the road. All right, active weather over the lower 48 right now, not a whole lot. We do have a bit of a trough kind of swinging on through portions of the northern tier of the country. That is bringing this skinny band of some showers up through parts of Minnesota, and we'll kind of work through the northeast later today. This upper level low due to Helene now kind of phasing off the coast, and we're going to see some back-end showers out of that today through the mid-Atlantic and southeast, but no big-time threats, all things considered. Now we take a look at watches, warnings, advisories, and radar. Again, some showers up here to the north through Michigan, Wisconsin, the UP of Michigan, even up into portions of Ontario. Also some showers here through the mid-Atlantic, through Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and even back down into Georgia and Florida. But all things considered, nothing crazy showing up. Watches, warnings, advisory-wise through the east. We did have some fog this morning. That's what most of those advisories are for. Out west through the northern plains, we do have red flag warnings. It is going to be quite windy over the next couple of days, so obviously don't burn anything. We've got some freeze warnings up here towards Missoula, Montana, which, by the way, one of my classes, there's this national forecasting challenge thing I have to do, and currently I'm forecasting for the city of Missoula, Montana for the next 2 weeks. So if I talk a lot about Missoula and whatever weather's happening there, it's because I have to look at it every day. So, not a city I'm used to forecasting for, and it's definitely become a challenge for sure, but hopefully today's forecast pans out well. I think I went a high of 73, a low of 34, and a peak wind gust of 13 knots, 12 knots, 14 knots, something like that. So hopefully that's what happens in Missoula today. Out west into California, it's hot. Again, excessive heat going to be a concern here through the foreseeable future. All right, let's time out this rain in the east a little bit today. Again, getting into this afternoon, an uptick of afternoon showers and storms, kind of getting a double play effect from this low pressure, pulling in air from the backside into it. Also, this trough bringing a kind of line of showers. So not expecting anything really severe today. I don't think like we saw the past couple of days. It's a less conducive setup, but some of this could try to become more convective in nature through the mid-Atlantic. So just keep an eye out through the Carolinas and Virginia, especially after the past 2 days. We've had multiple tornado warnings. Just go ahead and play it safe, have a way to get those watches and warnings. Also, this line that tries to move in through New York State this evening out of kind of the Great Lakes could have a little bit of convection with it, but really more showers than anything. And those work through during the overnight hours and into the early morning hours of tomorrow. Before tomorrow afternoon, with a little bit more daytime heating, we get another quick skinny band of convection that tries to fire here through the kind of mid-Atlantic and up into the northeast, but really starting to dry out by that point, I think. And we get into Wednesday evening, again, just a couple scattered showers left over and nicer conditions taking over for the most part. All right, what's coming on down the pipeline here? Well, some good news for you fall lovers. We've seen a change in some of the models here. Again, in the near term, we've got this quick trough swinging on through, but watch what happens later this week. And again, middle of the week, really just a lot of zonal flow across the country, which is going to bring relatively average temperatures, maybe a little bit more mild than usual, but all things considered, just pretty average here in the temperature department. But watch what happens later this weekend. See this little area of blue kind of scooting across Canada. Here's Saturday. Here's Sunday. Here's next Monday, a big time trough dumping right down over the east. And this would really cool things down and could also potentially lead to a storm forming just off the coast. And not necessarily a tropical system either, more of a mid-latitude cyclone system. So kind of an early taste of nor'easter season. We'll have to see if that happens and how strong it gets. But I mean, that's a strong trough, folks, and that's going to be enough to really cool things down as well. And we'll take a look at those temperatures next. But precipitation, again, after the next couple of days, pretty dry through much of the country. Again, we saw that with the southeast precipitation map, not a whole lot happening, but here comes that big time trough out of Canada. And look at this storm developing over the northeast. This is about a week from right now. Pretty feisty low pressure system there that could bring some active weather and with it cooler temperatures. And you'll see that on our temperature anomaly map. Again, through the next week, kind of average in the east, above average out west. But we do warm up through the middle of this week as that zonal flow kicks in. But here comes that storm system next week. Here comes that big trough, and look at all this blue taking over for much of the east. These are high and low temperatures, potentially 5 to 10, some places 15 degrees below average. And at this point, we'll be a week into October. So, our high temperatures and our average low temperatures are starting to come down anyway. So you get even colder than that. We're getting into sweater weather here and really starting to get into those first tastes of winter. Alrighty, folks. So that's the latest here. That's what I got for you. Big time update on the tropics. Again, some cold fall air potentially working in over the next week or two. All right. Again, have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday out there. Stay safe. Have a wonderful start to October. Make it a great day. And I'll see you all next time.